protect some of the natural and historic places that have shaped and defined who we are as a people and a country, and would not have been protected without support from the federal government. Though state lands are often managed to maximize profitability, public lands are managed by the federal government for a wide range of activities and on behalf of all Americans, and those activities to include recreation and sportsmen's activities, energy development, protecting open spaces that provide wildlife habitat, clean water, and clean air, what we call a multiple-use mandate. As stewards of these lands, we must work to find a balance between compelling yet sometimes competing interests and make sure that the federal government is a good neighbor to local communities. There are some places in our country where the highest, best use of public lands is conservation and recreation, and one of those places is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Arctic Refuge is one of our nation's crown jewels, and it deserves to be protected for generations to come. As a ranking member referenced, the area is home to caribou herds, polar bears, gray wolves, and numerous other nationally significant animal and plant species unique to the region. It also supports subsistence activities for Native Alaskan communities and is open to recreation such as hunting, hiking, fishing, and wildlife viewing. I'm strongly opposed to any attempts by the administration or this Congress to open up this National Wildlife Refuge to drilling, which would permanently degrade this natural wonder and could jeopardize Alaska's $9.5 billion outdoor recreation economy. I'm sorry we don't have representatives from here today to talk about the ways in which they contribute to the economy. But Mr. Purchot, in 2015, the Fish and Wildlife Service completed its revision of the Comprehensive Conservation Plan for the entire Arctic region, known as the CCP. The CCP, and then subsequently President Obama, recommended that Congress designate the coastal plain and other areas in the refuge as wilderness, our nation's highest level of federally protected land. Can you describe more the values on the coastal plain that Interior looked at in developing the CCP? Did the administration focus on long-term or short-term benefits to the American people?
Congresswoman Tsongas, thank you very much for the question. You mentioned a number of the values the CCP looked at and found for the Arctic Refuge. I would add to that that the coastal plain is a very integral part of a much larger ecosystem stretching from the south side of the Brooks Range and way to the east in protected areas in adjacent areas in Canada. And that the coastal plain here is very narrow, much narrower than further west, and in a way some of the wildlife and the values get condensed and become very much an integral part of upper watersheds in that area. It's well known one of the main calving areas of the porcupine caribou herd, which now numbers almost 200,000 animals and is shared with Canada in its habitat, calve on the coastal plain there in the Arctic Refuge. Other things that have changed a little bit, it's become a more important denning area, onshore denning area for threatened polar bear as sea ice melts and thins in the Beaufort Sea. It's also a designated important bird area for waterfowl and shorebirds across the entire coastal plain there. The caribou, I should mention, are very, very important to subsistence and culture of the Gwich'in people that are resident on the south side of the Brooks Range.
Well, this recommendation to designate the coastal plain as a wilderness is in stark contrast to the 1987 Department of Interior study that recommended fossil fuel development on the plain. So what have we learned in the past 30 years that confirms that this area is too special for drilling?
Of course, one might argue that there was a mistake made 30 years ago in the recommendation, but I think that we've seen worldwide, as well as in Alaska, in continued development, continued search for natural resources in the Arctic circumpolar, and that fewer and fewer non-developed areas remain, and particularly ones like the Arctic Refuge that has been a refuge since 1960 and was designated largely wilderness in the 1980 Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. And so I think the prominence or the uniqueness of the refuge has taken on even more significance in the last 30 years.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman. The gentleman from Utah, the